Dr. Jeff Spencer, Champion Maker here, and I'm going to share with you one of the most important models that I've ever put together. Have you ever been in a situation where you just kind of feel like I should be a lot farther along than I really am? And you think 10 years later that, you know what, I feel like I should have made a lot more progress than I've actually made. How come I just really don't feel like I'm making really any big leaps towards my bigger future? It just seems like no matter how much time passes, I'm just not quite getting to where I need to be. And why is it that every 10 years I seem to be thinking just a little bit different than I did before, that I could not have conceived of in advance of that? Well, that's really has a lot to do with our biology. And so this model that I'm going to be sharing with you is called the life lens progression. And this is the life lens progression. And as you can see here, the title, the first word in the title is life, meaning like our lifespan, meaning that we all have somewhere between, let's say, 75, 80 years and 120 years or so. We're not going to limit ourselves to that, but let's just kind of take that for this example right here. The second word is lens, meaning it's a way that we look at things. And so there's a life way of looking at things that demonstrates itself in a progression, which in this case is every decade. So every decade, we have a lens that's different that we're looking at life through. And if we look at the way that the life lens progression is organized, in the left-hand column here, we have decade, and then we have a driver. A driver is like an impulse behind that decade. And then we have a motive, like why exactly are we doing this in this particular motive, in this particular decade? And then we have purpose. In this decade, there is a very distinct purpose that I have observed is there associated with that decade. And then there's strength. Each decade has got its strength and it also has its liability. And we go back to the decade column here. We see that the first decade is 0 to 10. The second decade is 10 to 20. Third is 20 to 30. Then we have 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, 80 to 90, 90 to 100, and then 100 plus. And this is just the way that I've organized this. And this is something that was created, again, through my observation. I'm just an observer of people and humanity, and I get connections between different things. If we look here at decade 0 to 10, the driver is like curiosity. We're just curious about all sorts of things. You've got kids sticking their tongue in electrical outlets. They're putting knives in their mouths. And the motive for that curiosity is exploration. They're exploring themselves in this brand new place that they find themselves in, that they know nothing about. And the way that they start to get acquainted with that is that they start to explore it with crawling around on the floor, sticking fingers on everything, pushing every button that they could find. And the purpose of doing that is to create a connection between them and this big sandbox that they're now playing in. And in that very first decade, the strength is no limits because we have no experience with anything. We don't know what's harmful. We don't know what's good. We're just exploring everything. And the liability of that is of course, the risk of injury. And then when we move to the next decade, 10 to 20, the driver is emergence. And this is where we're kind of, now we've got 10 years under our belt and we're developing a vocabulary. We're starting to see things in an entirely different way. Now we got to deal with social media and everything that is sharing and telling us. Then we got our parents informing us. So there's lots of things happening as we're starting to ask a lot of questions about this particular decade. And the motive there is boundaries. Like, where do we actually fit into this? And what are the limits of play that I can expect myself to be confronted with so I know where I kind of fit in life at this point in the journey? And the purpose of decade 10 through 20 is fit. Where do I fit into this? How do I size up against other people? What are the social expectations of me? What is it that I'm inclined to do. It's kind of really for the first time finding a personal identity and a fit like in the culture. And the strength of that is just incredible abundant enthusiasm, just the willingness to explore like anything. Just again, we're a better bit more acquainted with our physical abilities. We're gravitating towards things that are of our personal interest. We still don't know our boundaries yet. We think that we're invincible, so we're trying all sorts of things there. And the liability of the second decade here is being incredibly reckless. There are certain things that people do between 10 and 20, especially as they get up towards 20, that just are amazingly reckless because, again, we generally don't have had to face the consequences of doing some things that can be of significant harm to us. And then in the third decade here, the 20s through 30s, and I want to pay particular attention to this because this starts to move into our sphere of conversation for us as entrepreneurs, us for people that are exploring business, us that have different parts of personal ambition. And the driver in this third decade is altruism. Altruism meaning that we want to create the utopia that we believe is just and fair, and that humanity can create if it can all agree on what has to happen to be able to fulfill that promise. And so the motive in the third decade is, again, like utopia. We're all going to be one happy family. There's nothing going to be but pure love. Everybody's going to be exploring everything that they're best at. There's going to be abundant encouragement. There is going to be absolutely no friction, only encouragement and support for doing that which we're best at. And the purpose of the 20s to 30s is equality. We want to make sure that there's some favoritism here, that everybody gets exactly the same opportunity as everybody else, so that there is no favoritism. And let me say something about this here, is that in the 20s or 30s, this is where we have kind of a steadfastness, almost like a religious fervor, to stand behind certain things because we're so convinced that we're so right. And we're also feeling that the previous generations that came along that couldn't create that utopia is because they just didn't quite understand it, but we're going to be the generation that makes the difference. So everybody stand out of the way, because I'm going to school you on exactly how this gets done. And the strength of the third decade is just this amazing conviction, like, nope, we're going to be the generation that does it. Just you guys screwed it up. Stand aside, because we are going to do that which has never happened before, because we are this special generation that has that ability. And the liability in the third decade is incredible rigidity. And it's thought just because we can think it, it is. And because we think it is, then there's no telling us that there's any other alternative, because I don't see it. And I just believe because I can see it, then I can manifest it. And only to say here that generally when that's attempted for like 10 years, it doesn't always, or rarely does it ever, deliver on that type of promise. And at that point, then people start looking for a more sensible way of engaging life that just has a little bit more clarity and a little bit more reality attached to it. And in the next decade, the 30s through the 40s, is acquisition, like stuff. I want the stuff. I want the stuff to be able to validate myself as having personal value, and to also demonstrate my ability to manifest those things that are within my competency. The motive in the fourth decade here, it's achievement. It's like, I have this desire right now to achieve certain things. I want to build a monument to self. I want to collect the homes. I want to collect the cars. I want to collect everything that's symbolic of a competent person, that has value, and that does show distinction, and does have the pride of ownership to be able to make things happen. And the purpose behind that is validation. Like, our life does have meaning, not only to ourselves, but probably more importantly at this stage is an external validation from outside sources, people, places, press, etc., that acknowledges us as being of high significance. And the strength of that decade is like tenacity. I can get through anything. I just mow everything down that gets in the way. Nobody's going to stop the kid. Anything that's in my way, I just mow it down. I'm going to run through it. Or I can get through 3 hours of sleep a night indefinitely to push something through because I'm given will and I'm given strength to be able to get through anything that impedes or gets in the way of me manifesting that which I conceive to be possible. And the liability of the fourth decade is incredible blindness, meaning that during that decade between the 30s and the 40s, we can be blinded because we're still kind of believing Hollywood's mythology. Like, you can have it all. You just need to want it bad enough. You need to show up, and you got to work yourself into the ground to be able to make it happen. But there's like nothing impossible. And I guess the irony here is that when we enter this fourth decade, coming off of altruism and the utopia idea of the third decade, is that we do really almost sometimes start with a little bit of nothing. We don't really have a lot. We're sleeping in a single apartment with maybe 10 other people, just metaphorically speaking. We're eating rice every night. But we have camaraderie, we have enthusiasm, we've got a lot of group support. And we also are now starting to develop our skills to be able to actually produce some things, especially in the electronic world where we can make meteoric progress in our lives and we can get richly rewarded for that. It takes on a different context where we can go to very little to a lot in 10 years. And as we start this fourth decade, 30 to 40, we're very energetic. We don't have a lot. We're in the game. We're hyper-focused. We want to get stuff done. We want to get rewarded for our time and effort. And then as we kind of go through that and we start to get some resources behind us, maybe making a lot more money, we spend money to buy things, all the things that we didn't have that we think that we need to have a fulfilled life, or that Hollywood tells us that we need to be accepted, to be a prolific achiever, someone that's worthy of being acknowledged. But every time we add something to that, it's another thing that we need to service in terms of money, just to even maintain it or to continue to pay for it if we're buying it, with a loan. And then that takes a lot of energy just to stay neutral, let alone gain further ground on anything. So what happens is that as we move through the 30s and we come to the ends of the 30s, sometimes we feel just incredibly overloaded in terms of debt and in terms of managing things. It's like we've lost the spontaneity that we had early in the decade. We're starting to feel like we're suffocated. We're 10 years older. If we have kids that are getting older, we got to shuttle them around. It takes a lot more resources to be able to care for them. We're putting on more weight that we don't like because our physical habits and our health management has changed a lot. The relationship now has at least 10 years of strain into it. So we're looking at each other in a different sort of way, more as a partnership maybe than love interests. There's all sorts of things that start to happen there where a critical mass gets built where we just feel like this is unmanageable moving forward, because all I'm doing is spending all my time and my resources maintaining what I've got. And of course that happens to be true. And a thing that I want to point out here is that what I'm describing doesn't mean that this is universally felt by everybody. This is something that I have observed to be very true and accurate in most instances that we can kind of look at as a gauge, and it's like a milestone marker against things in terms of the appropriateness for our experience, because sometimes we're going to look at this and we're going to say, well, I'm never going to be like that in the future. Well, you may find yourself being like that in the future. You're just not there yet. And so I just want to make sure that we keep this in mind, like as I'm going through this, is that there is some flexibility here, and this is not to be held rigidly. And then as we get to the 40, and we're now moving into the next decade, the 40 to 50, this is where our life is top heavy. There's a lot of pressure to perform. We're making more money, but we're putting it back into the business, so we're not saving as much. We look at what we've saved. It doesn't nearly match the time and effort that we put into it. We're still building the business. We want to now repaint the house or get a new house or whatever. There's a lot of pressure to do that. And you can kind of see what that feels like. We feel like we're in a trash compactor with this obligation to do more, and we're already at our limit and exhausted. That's kind of where we are. And so, what we can anticipate moving into the next decade, the 40 to 50 decade, this is the decade of order, meaning that now we've collected all this stuff in the previous decade. I can't take this, man. We got to prune some stuff back here because this is just unmanageable the way that it's going. This is not sustainable. Just to stay neutral is taking everything that we got. So now we need to establish order. And the motive behind this is that we need to create some structure in our life. It's no longer, frolicking every day, filling it every day with something of significance, but there's a cost to pay for it, an encumbrance, a financial load attached to it. Nope, we can't do that anymore. That was for the experiment in the 30 to 40 decade. Now we kind of need structure to responsibly hold where we are without going back to that previous existence where we become very top heavy with obligation. We want structure to help us manage the tendency and to protect ourselves from going back to the place that we were. Because this is also where chronic fatigue starts to set in. This is where the danger zone of ill health starts to emerge because of the push that we've done over the last, 20 or so years, maybe even 25 years, 30 years, is now starting to take its toll. So the purpose of the 40 to 50 decade is to create harmony. We don't want validation. That was last time. Now we need harmony, meaning that everybody that's part of the team, we need to work together and we need to do our job to make life easier for each other, to give us back some freedom to explore with creativity life's opportunity like we once enjoyed. Let's make sure that we're all rowing in the same direction so that we can conserve energy and we can be of joint mind and joint agreement on where we're headed and how we're going to get there. And the strength of this decade is efficiency. We don't want difficulty. We don't want more. We don't want more procedures. We don't want more obligations. We want to prune things back. We want to recover some energy. We want to develop our efficiency to get things done faster and more efficiently and get it done correctly the first time. And the liability of the 40 to 50 decade is exclusion. And exclusion means to not involve ourselves in something, because many times the trauma of being over-obligated too early in life can be like traumatic. It's just too much too soon, and the stress that it puts on us, it can make us sick. It could also help. It could also end in some serious relationship difficulty. And if that happens, then we become extraordinarily gun-shy because of the difficulty and the unpleasantness of that experience. We never want to go back to that place ever again. Therefore, we start to exclude ourselves from things that may actually tremendously benefit ourselves. Now, at the end of 40 and 50, this is where the big shakeout happens. 50 is kind of like the magic number here. So when we go from the 40s to the 50s, this decade is 50 through 60, the driver is contribution. When we talk about contribution, we're talking about giving back to others. We're talking about not just acquiring stuff for ourselves to build a bigger, better us in the eyes of others, but to perhaps share some of the things that we've learned or make a contribution financially to certain people, places, or things that are in line with our life values. We kind of feel like, okay, I spent the first 50 years all about me, and the promise is that I would be in a state of bliss at the end of 50 years because I would have amassed enough resources in a lifestyle that I could kind of put on cruise control to then ride that wave out for the indefinite future. But what we find is that things actually change at the 50s, where contribution becomes a big deal. I actually had someone that came to me, you would know who he is, and he was very successful, and he had 30 companies that were all worth $10 million, and That was his wife's, and his ambition was to, by the age of 50, be financially secure, which they were. And he came to me and said, Jeff, I think I'm going crazy because I'm starting to look at life differently now, and I just don't understand why. I've spent the last 30 years from 20 to 50 getting to this goal, and I've achieved it, and now I'm looking at myself in an entirely different way. I said, well, let me guess, Rich, that you now feel like you kind of need to give back because you've learned some things that you'd like to share with others to help shortcut their path to their bigger future. And he said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, Uncle Jeff's been in the game for a long time, and I just know how this works. And he said, oh my God, I thought for a second I was being crazy. And this is one of the reasons why we're going through this chart together, so that you can look at this and you can get a glimpse of what's coming, so you're not going to be taken surprised by what you see that you didn't believe was possible earlier in your life. But now that you're here, you're seeing it completely different. And I'm doing this because I want you to understand that you're not crazy. These things are supposed to happen. It's like a biologically released, time release vitamin, where at a certain point in the history of the vitamin, it activates a certain part of it that it didn't showcase earlier. And that's what this is like. This 50 to 60 decade of contribution, the motive of this is to be of service, but not of service to self, to create a better self by hoarding more stuff for us, but to being of service to other people, realizing that life is just not about us. First 50 years, yeah, it is about us, but from 50 on, we realize that, well, maybe it's not as much about me as I thought it was. So there is this dramatic shift, and this is where you're of service to people. And the purpose of this is we have a survivor's obligation to step into this, because if we've had good fortune and we've made it thus far, then we are obligated, in my language, we're more morally obligated to share some of the things that we've learned with other people to help shortcut their learning, or to make my life more understandable to them, to live a much higher quality of life and in turn be of service to others. And the strength of this decade is reliability. Yeah, because we realize that everything is not just in our time, but it's about being trustworthy and reliable to other people, so that other people can showcase what we've done in that respect, that respects the process of relationship, and it also respects the process of honoring people's time. And the liability in the 50 to 60 decade is excess. We can be on such a rampage, in such a pilgrimage to contribute to others' lives, that we can deplete ourselves in the process, because we recognize the relationship that we have to others and what we give others is its own energy source, and it's its own purpose giver to us as individuals, that can be euphoric in a sense that it's free and it doesn't cost anything. It's just us, and we can see the product of that is people living better, more higher quality lives of manifestation because of our contribution to it. And there are fewer things that are actually better than that. And what a great reason to get up each day and to be of service to other people. And then our next decade here is 60s to 70s, which would be me here. And the driver in the 60s to 70s is mentorship. And this is where we're really maybe no longer working, maybe a little bit, but we're kind of, moving towards retirement, where we're retiring and taking our time in retirement, but we're actually spending it towards helping other people in a variety of different ways. Where in the 50s, the 50 to 60, this is where we were still kind of in business, actively pursuing it, while we were spending some time in contribution. But now this is like full-on mentorship. And the motive for that is elevation. And it's not elevation for us, it's elevation for others, because we want to see other people raise their game to a place where they're now manifesting a life that they're capable of, that demonstrates for them what they can do by applying those things that have to go right. But it also showcases to other people what's possible when we play a sound life offense, that we win because of what we've learned that we're continuing to apply, but we're creating a double win in terms of our life quality experience because of what we're giving back to others. And I could tell you there's nothing better than that, because we adopted our daughter I was 58 when we adopted our daughter. She was 10 from Colombia, and there have been to date 11 years of service to that. And I can tell you it's by far the absolute most extraordinary experience that I've ever had in my entire life. The purpose of the 60s to 70 decade is creating a legacy. And the legacy being, we really realize that one thing that we're all going to leave is a legacy. And that legacy is going to be something that lives on in the human record, like electronically on the internet, so forth, that's a testimony to what we do with our time and our talents that we're all responsible for. And when we leave a memorable legacy for others that they can look at and showcase and they can emulate, then they can create a legacy that validates a life well lived, but it's also a legacy that's a testimony to the best of what humanity can create. And that's highly inspirational to other people to take the time to stay in the game long enough to learn the skill of goal achievement and apply it to amass as many extraordinary personal life experiences and achievements as possible. And the strength of this decade is insistence. Like, I insist that I be out there helping others because I want to shortcut their learning curve, and I want them to avoid as many preventable problems as possible. And you can be just a little bit irritating with that because it could be considered meddling, but it's just because you care so much about people that it may come off like that. And then the liability of the 60s to 70s is depletion. You can be so passionate about this that you don't rest, you don't eat well, you don't take vacations, you deplete your minerals, your neurotransmitters, your hormones, and everything else, which really doesn't serve you well, and we need to make sure that we don't dig a hole for ourselves by doing that. So at this point, you can see here the journey with some level of visibility. No matter where you are on this, you get a glimpse of kind of where this is headed. And the time varies a little bit. Some people get there a little bit sooner than others, some people a little bit later, but everybody seems to kind of go through this. And while they're going through this, they still retain certain aspects of previous decades that we've been through. So for example, like in mentorship, where I am like right now, at least for the next year, I'm still kind of in the maintaining order of my life so I can remain efficient. I'm still in the acquisition phase because there are certain things that I want to achieve. But the predominant feature of my life is this mentorship issue. The 70 to 80 decade is about succinctness, meaning that there's been enough water under the bridge. You've been through one lap of life's experiences. You kind of see what it's all about. You're starting to see things for a second and third time, like right now. And the motive in the 70 to 80 is proclamation, where you're going to declare and you're going to say whatever you want to anybody, because right now you don't care what anybody thinks. There's enough water under the bridge where whatever anybody thinks is not going to matter anyhow. And maybe you've been holding some things in for a while, but no longer. We're going to open the floodgates, and whatever you see it as being is that you're going to tell people what it is, and if they like it, great. They don't like it, well, that's okay too. And the purpose of this is to reconcile one's life now, to look back over the previous 70 years and say, well, what did I do with my life? And it may not be perfect. Very few people can say that it is, but what do we do with that? We have to be able to say that regardless of what happened and the decisions that I made, they may have seemed right at the time, but I saw what I thought was right, didn't really deliver on its promise. Maybe I can spare people that same illusion by being an advocate for them. But reconciliation to move forward without any tremendous remorse or regret about the past that keeps us paralyzed is a really important part of this. The strength is that we're really honest with people because we don't care. I'm going to tell you what it is. If you don't like it, too bad. If you do like it, well, that's great too. Either way, it doesn't matter to me, but I'm going to tell you exactly the way I see it. The liability, you can alienate people because sometimes you can be a little bit gruff, a little bit harsh, say things that are just a little bit too pointed, that have an extra dig in them that can be alienating. 80s to 90s, we're just going to go through these just so you get a sense of, what the golden era looks like. 80 to 90 is assessment. The motive is dignity. We're starting to get older. We look old. We don't have the energy that we had before. People are looking at us funny like we don't know anything. Maybe we're shuffling around a little bit, have a few more wrinkles, a lot of gray hair, or no hair left. People look at us as perhaps being insignificant, especially in today's culture. It's like, you guys that are older, you don't know anything. You're not up on the latest stuff. But, kind of we lose the sagely influence of the wisdom of the elders if we look at it like that. And the purpose of the 80s to 90s is to add value through wisdom. Wisdom is what's missing in today's world. It's not information. It's what do we do with it? What does history tell us about it? We have to kind of look to those that have a history to help guide us through this. And that's the purpose of this 80 to 90 decade, is that we can provide tremendous value to people if they'll take the time to listen. Strength is, that, again, the magic word wisdom. It takes a while to get there. Just because you think something, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. There's a lot of wasted time, effort, resource, and pain in taking actions on things that seem so right that go so wrong because we had no context of wisdom to evaluate them against in advance. So we end up making choices that seem right that don't go so right. Classic human condition. The liability is resignation. Yeah, you know what? I'm getting older here. Not a lot I can do about it. I cannot stop the hands of time. I see it in my body. I see it in my speech. I see it in every aspect of my life. I'm not going to resist it, but I'm certainly not going to cave into it. And then when we get to the 90s to 100, it's a revitalization. Because we have abundant enthusiasm, because our purpose is to elevate ourselves and others, because now we're kind of living on borrowed time. Our strength is that we're motivated because we still have time to do something. The liability is that we can be highly irritating because we're involving ourselves in too many things and that are personal to other people. And then 100 up, that's the count up. The count up here is, where any day beyond where we are is considered a great day and a bonus. The motive is to bless every second as being an opportunity to influence others and to showcase that getting older can be a sign and a demonstration of wiser and significant contribution. Our purpose can be to surrender to the fact that the biological clock is ticking. There's not a lot that we can do about it at a certain point. We have to engage it with a certain amount of dignity. And as we surrender to that, we're not caving in and throwing up the white flag too fast, but we're just recognizing what the gift is. And a strength here is we have immense power. We have a power to decide what it is that we're going to do with the remaining minutes, seconds, hours, days, and years that are in front of us. And the liability is dependence. Now maybe our kids need to change our second set of diapers. I mean, who knows? We can get a little giggle out of that, but that happens to be the truth. And that's what the life lens progression is all about. If we look at the life lens progression and what we've just discussed here, I hope you have found this valuable to you in showcasing some very important things that maybe we've wondered about. And what you'll find is that as you go through the decades, we always sense that we should be farther along than we really are. But why is it that we never feel that way? Well, a big part of this is the fact that every decade, this new lens that we have allows us to look at life in a different way that we never previously thought possible. And so it kind of is a new first every decade, and that's the reason why we kind of experience it as being new and different, but simultaneous, like we should be farther along than we really are. Another important side to this is that it helps us understand us. And as we kind of locate ourselves within this, we recognize certain things within this to be true. And those things that we see to be true, we take them as true because, again, this is a historical record that I've observed a lot over several decades to be fairly consistent. To only say that when we see where we are, then we can look downstream as to where we may be headed, and we can have a compassion towards those people that are there rather than to judge them. We can engage them from where they are. And conversely, we can look at where we are, and we can look back at the generations behind us that are coming behind us, and we can look at them with a certain level of compassion about the decisions that they're making, that we did too, that we now know were like ridiculous, but they seemed so real at the time. Gosh, if I had only known this, how my life would have been different. And it allows us to have some compassion for ourselves, some self-love about the fact that, we all have this life journey that none of us are exempt from, that does have certain consistencies in it that we can learn from and not be so hard on ourselves, and not expect ourselves to be perfect. There are certain things that just are. Like with these lenses, we didn't ask for this. It's just part of our biology. It's just the way that it's structured. And certain things that are structured, it takes time to understand them. And sometimes we trip and fall. We get some scraped elbows and knees from stumbling. But then we pick ourselves up, and it makes us a more compassionate us. It allows us to greet and accept those older than us in a different way, to garner and gain their wisdom, to show them dignity. It allows us to be that dignity for those that are behind us, that we can help shortcut their journey and help them not stumble so much. And that's what the value of this life lens progression conversation is. And I'll also say that there's many other aspects and parts to this. This is like an introduction to it. At some point, perhaps we'll have another session here where we go into deeper levels of this. But what I'd like to say is that if you would like a copy of the chart here, you could just push the button below and you'll gain access to that. And if you're inclined to take a deeper dive on this, you have a personal interest in looking at this specifically for you and your career development, then certainly I extend the invitation to you to fill out an application that you can electronically submit to me, where we could look at doing a phone call together to discuss what your needs are and how we might be able to work together. And to do that, you can go to www.drjeffspencer.com, DRJEFFSPENCER, drjeffspencer.com, and that'll take you to the website. In the upper right-hand corner, it will be a coaching application that you fill out. I'll receive that. I'll be in touch, and then we can pick up and do a conversation together. Please be mindful that there's only one of you in all of creation. And if you understand some of the things that we're talking about as I'm disseminating some of the models that I've created together, as you become a showcase for what's possible in terms of human achievement, please never discount the importance of that, because as you perform at higher levels, what it does, it's you're honoring your talents and your purpose for being here. It's how you say thank you to your friends and your family, to your mentors, to your benefactors. And probably one of the reasons why understanding this to perform at a higher level, because you know what's coming, is that it demonstrates for others what's possible. So thanks for joining the video, and we'll see you next time. Onward and upward.